Hi everyone. Continuing with our foundations unit today. Might not be the full 15 minutes, but we'll just kind of see how it goes. This was where we're starting today is basically with the Constitutional Convention, and so I'm going to see if I can jump over here to where we left off, which was right about there. All right, and we went through the Constitutional Convention and the big issues that they had at the convention the other day. Again, stuck on representation for each of the states and what was fair, what was right. And electing the president was one of the big sticking points, and they came up with the Electoral College, which we will get into in another chapter. And slavery, obviously, was an issue. So let's go to just some of the more general things and then specific. In the Constitution, there are these ideas that are woven into there that we should just kind of be familiar with. So popular sovereignty is the idea that the people rule, the people decide, the people have a say. The concept of limited government is in the Constitution, which is the government is not supposed to be all powerful, and no one branch is also all powerful, but that there are limits placed on the government, that the Constitution does not just grant them powers, but by granting them powers, it also restricts what the government can do. The idea of federalism, which is shared powers between national and state governments. Separation of powers and checks and balances are both very similar. The idea of checks and balances is just one branch checks another branch to keep them in check, to make sure they don't go off the rails. But in order to have checks and balances, you have to have a separation of powers. So it's not just all the power with a king or all the power with a legislative branch. So our government is made up of separation of powers, and those powers check each other. Judicial review, I put a question mark because there's some debate as to whether or not judicial review is in the original Constitution. If you've taken APUSH or something, you may know that it was I guess, found or made up or created in the case Marbury versus Madison. Judicial review is affirmed, reaffirmed, but some would say it is in the original Constitution. So those are some general ideas in the Constitution. We look at the specific breakdown, which we'll go to in just a second. I'll scroll through the Constitution for you. It is, think of the Constitution as a book. It's a pretty short book. It is the shortest written Constitution in the world. Article 1 is the longest chapter, if you want to consider each of the articles almost like chapters. Article 1 talks about the legislative branch, so it deals with the House and the Senate. Article 2, everything you want to know about the executive branch is there. And Article 3 is the judicial branch. So those are the three branches of government in the first three articles. They explain whatever the requirements are, if any. I mean, there's no requirements really for the Supreme Court judges, but Article 1 and 2, it talks about age and if how long you have to live in the U.S. or if you have to be born here or whatever. And it also addresses powers of the branches in Article 1 and Article 2. The founders put Article 1 first because they wanted, when Americans read the Constitution, Americans to understand that they were putting the most emphasis on the legislative branch, that would start off as the most powerful branch, and depending on who you talk to and what the time period is, some would say still is the most powerful branch. So Article 1 is legislative branch. Anything you want to know about that, you just look in Article 1. Article 2, executive. Article 3, judicial. Article 4 deals with states. Now, it's not state powers like the 10th Amendment would be. Article 4 deals with like state versus state relations. It's not one that we reference a whole lot, but Article 4 deals with state sort of issues. Article 5, it just addresses the 4 ways to amend the Constitution. And then Article 6 is all Article 6 does, national supremacy. Article 6 just says if there's a conflict between the states and the nation prevails. So it's the national government is supreme. And Article 7 just says how to ratify the Constitution, requiring 9 out of 13 states to ratify. That article is essentially irrelevant now. We don't ever need to look at it because the Constitution has been ratified. So really, when you are, and then after the Article 7 are the amendments. If you are ever browsing through the Constitution for one reason or another, you would use Article 1, 2, 3, possibly 4, probably not 5, which is how to amend the Constitution, probably not 6, because all it says is the national government supreme, and you'd never look at 7. and then you would use the amendment. So it's really, when you break it down, it's not the longest document in the world. It is fairly easy to navigate around the Constitution. So I wanted to just go over and scroll through it real quickly. I just went to this constitutionus.com site, and you look at the Constitution. It's broken down. It starts off with the preamble, which is the introduction. And then so Article 1 is about the legislative branch. And again, I'm going to scroll through pretty quickly. This is also some of this. I don't know if you can quite see from your end, but there's a slightly different font color. And those are the parts that have been removed by amendments. So you see the really very beginning there of Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, the very beginning of it has been removed, and some of the end of it. And well, that first part there, they're talking about 3/5 compromise. In Part 3, Clause 3, they're talking about 3/5 compromise, and that no longer is around, so we don't need to worry about slaves and how they're counted and all of that. So you go through Section 3, Section 4, okay, Section 5. Now, this part right here is one you got to know. Okay, Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, Section 8. This is where they list, where the Constitution lists all the things that the U.S. government can do. All right, so they're going to just, spell these out, boom, boom, boom. And so you have 17 specific things that the Congress can do. Number 18 is called the Necessary and Proper Clause, and this is going to allow the government to expand their powers. So it's a very controversial clause still to some. There are some people who believe that the U.S. government sometimes goes way beyond its intended powers by using that 18th clause. But Article 1, Section 8, 18 different clauses. The first 17 are 17 specific powers of what the government can do. Then you go to Article 1, Section 9, and these are the things that the government cannot do. And there's not a lot of lists, but they're saying there that they can't take away habeas corpus, which is the right to know your charges and not be held indefinitely in jail or something. That you have to be brought in front of a judge and told what your charges are. And then you may have heard of no bill of attainder, but no ex post facto laws. So that's sort of a well-known one here. The government can't pass a law that makes it illegal to do something that was legal, and they punish you for it, even though you did it when it was legal. If that makes sense. They can't. That's basically after the fact. They can't punish you for something after the fact, after you did it when it was legal. And then so you're going down through, and you see Article 2. So Article 2 is the second longest of the articles. It talks about how the president, requirements for the president, how the president comes in office. A lot of this section, this whole Part 3 here in Article 2, you can see it's the different font color. That has all been removed by the 12th Amendment. They've changed the way the Electoral College works. They did that early on. So again, if you think about it, this is our document that sets up our government. And the second longest chapter, in a sense, is Article 2. And if you look at, as I scroll slowly here, okay, Section 2, Section 3, Section 4, okay, that's it. So that's the second longest part. This is not a long document at all. Article 3 is the Supreme Court, not real specific, that's it. Article 4, you see states' relations. Another pretty short one, Article 5, is just one paragraph, the 4 ways to amend the Constitution. Article 6, again, mostly national supremacy. Article 7, ratification. And then, so you have the signers here. And then, let me see if we can go down and get amendments. Okay, right here. All right, so here are amendments. All right, I don't know why they said article there, but amendments. So you have, these should really be Amendment 1. I'm not sure why they put it that way, article, because that will confuse you. So there are 7 articles in the Constitution and then 27 amendments. So these are amendments. You go through these, and again, 27 changes and 10 were right away initially. So they made it very difficult to change the Constitution. They did that intentionally. So you go through, okay, 27. And the last one was done not too long ago, and that basically is about compensation for representatives. So that's that. Let me go back to just a little bit more here, and I'll finish up with this. So a couple sort of final things here. The ratification debate is between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Federalists favored a strong central government, a powerful central government, and Anti-Federalists favored states' rights. The Federalists knew that the Constitution maybe was not perfect, but they wanted it over what they had, which was nothing really with the Articles. The Anti-Federalists feared it. They mostly feared that the government was going to be way too powerful. The problem was the Federalists were unified in the idea of let's just pass this. The Anti-Federalists, they all had their different reasons. They were not as unified. One of them might like the Congress, might like the president, but they might not like the fact that Supreme Court judges were not elected. Another person may say, no, I'm fine with the fact Supreme Court, some judges aren't elected, but I don't like the fact that the president doesn't have term limits initially. So that there were a lot of issues people had with it. The one, and the Federalists did write the Federalist Papers. They were well planned out. They were a series of essays basically explaining why the Constitution should pass. And they had it really well organized, and they had a plan. The first many talk about just generally why we need a new government, what the issues were, and then they get into specific branches and parts of the new government arguing for it. The authors of the Federalist Papers were Alexander Hamilton, and he was one of the big ones, and James Madison. They wrote the most. The third one was John Jay. He only wrote like single digits. So it was Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. I wrote the Federalist Papers. One of the things that you'll hear a lot about that the Anti-Federalists wanted was they wanted a Bill of Rights, that they demanded a Bill of Rights because the Bill of Rights is not in the original Constitution. And that is true. There were a lot of other things the Anti-Federalists wanted or didn't like or whatever about it, but it's easy to talk about a Bill of Rights. And so they demanded there be a Bill of Rights. The authors of the Constitution thought a Bill of Rights added to the Constitution was actually sort of dumb because all of the states already had a Bill of Rights. So the thinking was if you lived in North Carolina, you had protections, a Bill of Rights. They had a Bill of Rights here. So why do we need one in the national government in their Constitution? But also because, and this is still debated, if we add a list of rights in the Constitution that people have, what if it's a right that's not there? Does that mean that the people then don't have that right? And so they were a little leery of just labeling 7 rights, 10 rights, 40 rights. They were saying, look, we can't just make a list of rights because if we're giving you a list of rights, that means the other things can be taken away. But the Anti-Federalists demanded it, and as a compromise to get the Constitution passed, they did end up adding a Bill of Rights. So that's that. Now, the amendment process is, I wouldn't get hung up on this a lot. It sometimes confuses people. I put the little chart on the bottom. When you're thinking of a constitutional amendment, is very difficult to get through. A constitutional amendment has to pass the national level and then go to the state level. And it has to have 2/3 at the national level and then get 3/4 of state approval. Now, there are actually 4 ways to do it. And so if you see on the bottom here on the left, it can start with either 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate separately, or 2/3 of a national convention. That's very difficult. That'd be like a constitutional convention. You'd have to have special people called up. So it's much more likely to start the first way, 2/3 of both houses of Congress, because those members of Congress are already meeting. They're already they have jobs. They go to Washington and they meet. So it's most likely to start with 2/3 of both houses of Congress. If it does pass 2/3 of both houses of Congress, you can see it then needs 3/4 of state governments to go into effect, or 3/4 of special conventions in each of the 50 states. Much like how a national convention would be very rare and difficult, having 50 state conventions would also be rare and difficult. So for an amendment to get approved, it's most likely 26 to 27 amendments have been approved by the 2/3 both houses of Congress, and then approved, going over it, ratified by 3/4 of state legislatures, because those state government workers those state officials that's their job. They're going to job all the time. So just think of it in the ones that have a permanent job, not special conventions, but the members of the National Congress, the members of the state Congress, they have a job, and so they can much more easily, routinely meet and talk and debate these amendments. So the amendment process is very difficult, most likely to go from national government, from both houses of the national government, to 3/4 of the state government for approval at the state legislatures. Okay, so my time is up, and I appreciate you paying attention. Thank you.